Hi guys, we are now at the final part of George's Marvellous Medicine, so sit down, snuggle up and enjoy the rest of the book. Mother! Wailed Mrs. Cranky. You just drunk 50 doses of George's Marvellous Medicine, number 4, and look what one tiny spoonful did to that little old brown hen. But Grandma didn't even hear her. Great clouds of steam were already pouring out of her mouth and she was beginning to whistle. This is going to be interesting, Mr. Cranky said, still grinning. Now you've done it, cried Mrs. Cranky, glaring at her husband. You've cooked the old girl's goose. I didn't do anything, Mr. Cranky said. Oh, yes, you did. You told her to drink it. A tremendous hissing sound was coming from above their heads. Steam was shooting out of Grandma's mouth and nose and ears and whistling as it came. She'll feel better after she's let off a bit of steam, Mr. Cranky said. She's going to blow up, Mrs. Cranky wailed. Her boiler's going to burst. Stand clear, Mr. Cranky said. George was quite alarmed. He stood up and ran back a few paces. The jets of white steam kept squirting out of the skinny old hag's head, and the whistling was so high and shrill it hurt her ears. Call the fire brigade, cried Mrs. Cranky. Call the police. Man the hose pipes. Too late, said Mr. Cranky, looking pleased. Grandma, shrieked Mrs. Cranky. Mother, run to the drinking trough and put your head under the water. But even as she spoke, the whistling suddenly stopped and the steam disappeared. That was when Grandma began to get smaller. She had started off with her head as high as the roof of the house, but now she was coming down fast. Watch this, George, Mr. Cranky shouted, hopping around the yard and flapping his arms. And there's a picture of her just there. Watch what happens when someone's had 50 spoonfuls instead of one. Very soon Grandma was back to normal height. Stop, cried Mrs. Cranky. That's just right. But she didn't stop. Smaller and smaller she got. Down and down she went. In another half-minute, she was no bigger than a bottle of lemonade. How do you feel, Mother? Asked Mrs. Cranky anxiously. Grandma's tiny face, still bore the same foul and furious expression it had always had. Her eyes, no bigger now than little keyholes, were blazing with anger. How do I feel? She yelled. How do you think I feel? How would you feel if you'd been a glorious giant a minute ago and suddenly you're a miserable midget? She's still going, shouted Mr. Cranky gleefully. She's still getting smaller, and by golly, she was. When she was no bigger than a cigarette, Mrs. Cranky made a grab for her. She held her in her hands and she cried, How do I stop her getting smaller still? You can't, said Mr. Cranky. She's had 50 times the right amount. I must stop her, Mrs. Cranky wailed. I can hardly see her as it is. Catch hold of each end and pull, Mr. Cranky said. By then, Grandma was the size of a matchstick and still shrinking fast. A moment later, she was no bigger than a pin. Then a pumpkin seed, then... Where is she? Cried Mrs. Cranky. I've lost her. Hooray, said Mr. Cranky. She's gone, she's disappeared completely, cried Mrs. Cranky. That's what happens to you if you're grumpy and bad-tempered, said Mr. Cranky. Great medicine of yours, George. George didn't know what to think. For a few minutes, Mrs. Cranky kept wandering around with a puzzled look on her face, saying, Mother, where are you? Where have you gone? Where have you got to? How can I find you? But she calmed down quite quickly, and by lunchtime she was saying, Ah, well, I suppose it's all for the best, really. She was a bit of a nuisance around the house, wasn't she? Yes, Mr. Cranky said. She most certainly was. George didn't say a word. He felt quite trembly. He knew something tremendous had taken place that morning. For a few brief moments he had touched the very tips of his fingers, the edge of a magic world. And that is the end. But we have a little quiz to do to see how well you have been listening. So, question number 1. What is the first thing George puts into his medicine? Is it A, Golden Gloss hair shampoo? Is it B, Super Foam shaving soap? Or is it C, Waxwell floor polish? Have a little think. Okay, and the answer is A, Golden Gloss hair shampoo. Question number 2. What colour does the medicine need to be? Is it A, brown? Is it B, blue? Is it C, green? Have a little think. And the answer is A, brown. Number 3. What happens when Grandma drinks George's medicine? Does she A, start to dance? Does she B, jump off her chair? Or does she C, run in circles? And the answer to that one is B, she jumps off her chair. Question 4. After his grandma, what animal does George feed his medicine to? Is it A, a pig, B, a cow, or C, a hen? And the answer is C, a hen. And final question, what's the name of George's father? Is it A, Mr. Frilly Frankie? Is it B, Mr. Killycranky? Or is it C, Mr. Really Ranky? And the answer to that one is B, Mr. Killycranky. I hope you all got 5 out of 5. See you soon.